Hey guys, thanks for tuning in, coming back, all that stuff. Hope you're having an awesome day. And I wanted to do a little bit different video today. And in this video, I'm talking about fine art photography. And what I'm talking about is the question that's been hanging over my head for a little while, and that is, what in the hell is fine art photography? And the reason I ask that is because, I'm on social media and those kind of things, just like anybody, and I'm reading about things on photography websites and places, and I keep coming across, it could just be that, like there's a theory that like when you start taking an interest in something, you see more of it, right? So it's like you talk about red cars and you're driving around the road and every car is red or whatever. So it could be just that I'm thinking more about fine art photography, and I'll get to that in a minute. But I've been seeing more and more like in social media and websites and photography related things that I read that say, so-and-so a fine art photographer, so-and-so a fine art photographer. And I'm trying to figure out like what makes someone a fine art photographer, because there's not a real definition to it. I've been looking it up and reading about it and trying to get more familiar with what it is, because I have in my head what it is, what I think it is, and I might see somebody's work, and a lot of times I'll see landscape and architecture, which I think are two subjects that are often used in fine art photographs. But you might see a landscape photographer with all these just stunningly gorgeous photos from, God knows where. And you're like, that's totally fine art. I mean, badass, so gorgeous, love it, amazing. But I've seen a lot of other people who I'm like, yeah, it's not bad. I mean, I don't want to sound judgy. Like, you can look at my photographs and say, not bad. So, but, they don't necessarily strike me as fine art. They're just like a photograph, and so, and again, I take tons of photographs, right? And many of them, in fact, most of them, and maybe all of them, or I should say none of them, are actually fine art. And that's okay. Again, I don't want to sound judgy because I don't have a background in fine art or the arts or in any of that kind of stuff. I'm just curious, and I'm curious what you think about fine art photography. So if you'll leave me some comments, I'd love to hear what you think and how you define it. But I was looking it up, and so I go to Wikipedia because that's a great resource. And it says they're photos created according to the vision of the artist, and they generally have a subjective intent. Okay, so I get that, right? You think of something and then you go create it, or you interpret it in post to be the way you want it to look. Totally get that. Makes perfect sense to me. They contrast that to photojournalism, which to me is very documentary, like a newspaper reporter, that sort of thing, where you go somewhere. I saw this and I took a snapshot of it, and here's the photo. There's no editing or post-processing. It's documentary, right? It's realism. They also contrast that with commercial work, which is sort of product-based. And so that's, hey, someone hires me to take a photo of their thing, and I photograph their thing, and I give them the photograph of their thing, and they give me money for the photograph of their thing, right? So that's to sell a product. So to me, photojournalism is about realism. Commercial photography is about the product. So then fine art photographs, that must be about the artist, right? And so I looked up, and it says, and I read a number of different websites. There's good articles on digital DPS, right? Digital Photography School. There's a website, Photography Life, which is good. I read about stuff on f-stoppers. And so feel free to go Google this and read it if you like. But basically, some of the common things that people say about fine art, they express an artist's perception or emotions. Okay, I get that. They're created for the sake of selling the work or putting them on display somewhere. It shows personal impressions that the artist has of whatever it is they're photographing. Makes sense. And expresses an idea or a message. And this is where it could be conceptual or sort of fantastical in nature. Totally get that. All those things, I read those off and tick them off. I'm like, yeah, it makes total sense. That sounds like a fine art photograph to me. So in other words, none of that says it's a literal representation of what you saw. So it's not a snapshot. It's not a product photo. It's not a realistic documentary photojournalistic thing. It's fine art. And so that got me thinking, am I a fine art photographer? I don't really know. I mean, it sounds kind of snobby almost to call yourself a fine art photographer. And by the way, I'm not trying to insult those of you that are fine art photographers. I'm just literally sharing my, uneducated opinion about it. And that is, it just seems kind of like, well, I make fine art photographs. And so it sounds like, anytime you get into the realm of art, you kind of come across that. You know what I'm saying, right? But the point is that if photojournalism is about realism and commercial photography is about the product, then I think fine art is about the artist and his or her vision. And so I kind of am a fine art photographer in some ways, and I don't think of myself that way, and I never have until recently when I started doing stuff and reading about it. Because what do? I express my perceptions or emotions. Yeah, I mean, you see all my video, or maybe you don't, but I make all these videos about how I change things in my photos in post to express my vision, right? Dead on. It's created for sale or display. My photos don't really ever go on display, but yeah, I put them up for sale, you bet. They show personal impressions. Absolutely, like how I'm feeling, I'm exuding that through the photograph, and how I'm editing or post-processing the photo to look in the end. So expressing an idea or a message, I don't really do that very much, and that's because that's more conceptual or fantastical to me. So I might do a tiny bit of that, but that's not really my bag, baby, as they say. So what is fine art? Well, when I started thinking about it, the things I think of, and I got to look at my list here, is I think of monochrome initially, right out of the bat. Right out of the gate. Monochrome for sure, right? High contrast at that, right? So a high contrast black and white, all right, you're definitely in the fine art realm in my opinion. Minimalism, right? Very minimalist in nature, right? A lone tree or whatever, right? Totally get that. I think that seems like fine art. A long exposure. I find myself shooting more and more long exposures, and many of them I convert to black and white because they just look really good. Is that fine art? I don't really know, but that's the sort of things that I think about being fine art. Architecture and landscapes, right? I love to shoot those things. And then things that are conceptual in nature. I don't really do that, but and by the way, there's a whole genre of fine art portraiture and fine art nudes. I'm not getting into that. It's not my bag. But I went into Google and just did a quick Google search. Let's take a look here. So here I am on Google Images. I just typed in fine art photography, and if you take a look, you see these high contrast black and white landscapes, right? Sold. You see these fantastical portrait pieces like that or this, right? Animals, that's fine art, right? Especially with that really dark black background and then the high contrast, really crisp animal, especially with his mouth open. Absolutely. All that stuff is fine art. You see a little bit of the nudes and that sort of thing, but you get into things up here, and here's some things, some terms, right? Landscapes, right? What do fine art landscapes look like? Looks like a lot of long exposures, Milky Way stuff, you bet. A lot of monochromes, long exposure monochromes, you bet. So all that stuff makes perfect sense to me, and I think of that as being fine art, right? So things like that are minimalist in nature. Let's see if minimalism is in here somewhere. Okay, I had to type in minimalist into the search bar, but here's minimalist or minimalism, right? At work, totally same kind of thing. A lot of long exposure black and whites with just a fraction of a scene, right? So just the top of that building, or just this leaf here, or whatever it may be. So those kind of things all totally just scream fine art to me. I also went over to 500px. If you're a member of that site, they got some gorgeous photos there. I'm not on it anymore. I quit a few years ago. But if I typed in fine art to do a search here, what's coming up? Long exposures, black and white, monochrome, high contrast, some conceptual stuff, some portrait work, there's some portrait work. There's landscapes. There's some conceptual stuff. Even a little bit of product. That's not really product, but cool things like that. So. Here's some fantastical thing. I mean, that's just really cool, right? So those kind of things, fine art to me, you bet. So one of the reasons I started getting into this sort of conversation with myself was because I made this photo and I was like, wow, that's gorgeous. It's like fine art. And then I kind of paused and I was like, well, what the hell's fine art? I mean, like, how do you define it? That sort of fits my idea of fine art. It's black and white. It's high contrast. It's not really minimalist, but it's definitely a long exposure. It's like 90 seconds or something. And it's kind of landscapey. You got mountains and clouds and water, but it's also a little bit cityscapey / architectural because you have a little bit of that in there. So it's just something from Austria that I shot when I was there last year. So I started trying to figure out, am I a fine art photographer? I don't really know, but that's kind of what got me thinking about it. So I'd love to hear your feedback about what you think a fine art photographer is. Let me know in the comments. And while I'm at it, I'm going to pop into this here in Luminar and show you how I made this photo. Okay, so here I am. I've got the raw develop filter. So here it was before and after. I was able, because it's a raw file, to bring back some of the detail in the sky where it was, that 90 seconds is just too long, right? So I got nice smooth water, but a little too blown out in the sky, but I was able to bring that back. Next, I went straight to black and white, just to go ahead and convert that. I also did a little bit of luminance work here to increase the luminance on some of the warmer tones, as well as a little bit on the blue. And that was just because those parts of the photo were a little bit dark and I wanted to brighten them. And then in the tone filter, added some contrast, took down the highlights all the way, and bumped up the whites and the shadows a little bit, and just trying to get the light under control. And, I think that was the before and the after, and then the entire photo before after so far. From there to there with 3 filters, we're getting there. And this is where I get kind of into the artistic sort of edits. First, add some image radiance. So if you look at the before and the after, it adds a little bit of that dreamy kind of romantic glow, which I like and I think looks really good. And that's something that's commonly used on landscapes, especially when they're kind of in the realm of fine art. Here I went negative structure on the water. So if you look at the water, let me show you one more time. Before, even though it was a 90-second exposure, I still have some movement and that sort of thing in the water. And I just went completely blurred. Now, it may be a little bit much. You could take that down after you've masked it in. I could do something like that, but I kind of like it that way. I mean, again, we're all friends here, so if I can get this thing, oops, here, I'll just type that in. All right, boom. Anyway, we're all friends here, just having fun, so I'm going to leave it that way. Next up, I've got dodge and burn. So there's the before dodge and burn. It was a little too contrasty and dark on that right side of the image, and the buildings, which are, pretty white, aren't white enough or bright enough. So I basically just brightened that section of the photo, and yet I still think I have plenty of contrast. So I just think it was an improvement. Then I went in and added some structure just to apply that across the center of the photo, just to give a little pop to the mountains and a little bit of the buildings, and then some denoise in the sky just to soften that up a little bit. And my final step was just an erased image layer where I took out a couple little things here and there that were bothering me. And that's the photo, right? So it was a quick edit, really. There's the before, and there's the after. So, is that a fine art photograph? I don't really have any idea. I mean, it fits a lot of my criteria. Monochrome, long exposure, high contrast. It's not really minimal, but it's got a lot of minimalist sort of things, like an empty sky that's really smooth, empty body of water that's really smooth. But it's not minimal. You wouldn't, I don't think, look at the photo and say it's minimal. But, what does it tick the other stuff? Does it express my perception or emotion? Yeah, right. I think it does. Is it created for sale or display? Yeah, absolutely. I put my work up for sale. Every time I have something new, I add it to my portfolio. Does it show my personal impressions? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the photo started like that. So some of it was how I shot it, which was the long exposure. And then some of it is how I edited it with, the monochrome conversion and the really smooth water and sky, and then punching up a little detail and changing the contrast and all that. So I definitely think it fits the realm of fine art. Still fighting my cold. I definitely think it fits in the realm of fine art. It's not based on realism necessarily. The world is not black and white. The world does not have smooth water. It's not product photography, so it's not commercial in nature. Therefore, that leaves it fine art, right? Which is the artist, which is me in this case, expressing my vision for the shot. That's my vision. That's how I did it. I hope it helps. Really, it's just a discussion about fine art. And, I love fine art. The fantastical sort of creative conceptual stuff is amazing. The architectural stuff, the landscape stuff, I love it all, to be honest. I just never thought of myself as a fine art photographer. And then when I got into this photo, I thought it was kind of fine art-ish. And that just sort of made me explore the genre in a little bit more breadth. And then I'm kind of like, well, what kind of photographer am I? Am I a fine art photographer? I don't really know. I'm not going to run around and start billing myself, Jim Nix, fine art photographer. That's not me. I'm just kind of the dude that makes videos and takes photos and talks about them. But maybe I am. I go out to shoot now, and I'm less concerned with, I want to get tons of photos of this place, and I'm more concerned with, I want to get, a few really cool photos of this place. So I'd say I'm changing, but I don't know that I'm going to call myself a fine art photographer anytime soon. Nothing wrong with it. I'm not picking. I'm just saying, don't know if I can get myself to call myself that, but it doesn't matter. I'm just taking photos and having fun. Hope you are too. Thanks for watching and listening. Let me know if you like this kind of video. Leave some comments, that sort of thing. We'll be talking again soon. Have a great day, my friends. Take care and adios.